I'm going to go first here. I want to introduce the project to you all before we let our guests talk a little bit more about their expertise areas. For my part, I'm going to focus on the wildlife impact of this wildlife casualty count. Every year in the US, there are between 1 and 2 million large animal collisions with 1 million small animal collisions and large animal collisions, of course, every single day. So that is obviously hugely impactful and a big problem for the wildlife and for humans, which Ron will get into shortly. This is very impactful to wildlife populations around our country. And World Wildlife Fund report from 2024 points out that there's been a 39% decline in animal populations in North America alone. Now, cars and roads are not the only problem with this decline, of course, but they're certainly not helping. Our wildlife face a lot of challenges, but our development should not be one of those things. We do have some solutions. Wildlife crossings have been shown to really help with these collisions, as well as barrier fencing. In general, in order to build wildlife crossings, in order to build the case for them, we need more data. And data tells us where the animals are at most risk. Data can show that this is in fact a big problem, and evidence can open up people's eyes to this issue. So this wildlife casualty count, this wildlife casualty count is getting us out driving on Minnesota roads and counting the roadkill that we see. We'll be doing this with an app called, it's actually called ROADS. It's an acronym. It's called Roadkill Observation and Data System. It was developed by Center for Large Landscape Conservation based in Montana. And I'll show you later a project that they did or that they are actively doing with this app at the end of our talk today. And Caleb and Taylor are going to talk a little bit about how they've used it in Missouri with the Department of Transportation. And I'll also show you how to download and use the app in just a couple of minutes. But for now, we're going to hear from Ron from University of Minnesota Duluth about his work. And it looks like, Ron, that you are on mute, but hopefully you can unmute now.
Oh, I just tried to, but there we go. Okay.
All good.
All right. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I'm up here and I have worked a little bit with animal vehicle collisions, specifically deer vehicle collisions. And I notice we also have wildlife vehicle collisions on here too. So it's all the same thing. It just depends on what the vehicles hit. When I worked here in Minnesota, basically it was a DVC project funded by MnDOT, where I worked with Raphael Stern in the Twin Cities, and what we were looking at is distribution of DVCs across the state. There's a couple of ongoing projects also as well, the Bell Museum project to salvage wildlife, which was funded by the ENRTF, and MnDOT and Minnesota Zoo have worked on turtle conservation, and that's where they have found those barriers to crossings, or actually end fences, are useful for turtles. And then we have this project here, which is kind of interesting because about 5 or 6 years ago, I tried to get funding for this project, a very similar project, and didn't. So next slide, please. So, and I always like to bring in, deer are probably the most important, at least here in the eastern states. And we get out west, you have elk and mule deer and other species as well. But there is definitely a human component to it. And not all of them get this much attention. So this was one that I was actually driving home from work one day and had to be rerouted, and looked in the paper the next day to find out why. And there was a deer DVC and then an additional secondary collision. So lots of emergency vehicles. And that's one thing that, we don't often think about, first of all, is all the resources that go into going down or coming in on a DVC, but then secondly, the effect on the people themselves. You know, when you hit a deer or an animal, you always you don't like that. Next slide, please. So part of our research was to look at unreported DVCs, something like the previous slide. That's official vehicles are called there, and they obviously get reported to the Department of Public Safety because police officers were involved. A lot of times, though, deer just get hit by a glancing blow, and what we did is we compared 35,000 DVCs over 15 years on the same stretch of road to what we found in 1 year. And what we found here, for example, on this stretch, was that there was 18 times as many DVCs reported or that we found compared to what was actually reported to DVC. And that's a consistent thing. Next slide, please. And it's a consistent in the sense State Farm maintains a database, and they think there's about 40,000 or so DVCs in Minnesota each year. DPS, when they get reports, it's usually about 1,200, 1,400 deer a year, and they also break them down into fatalities, serious injuries, etc. The important thing about this is when you look at the cost of each type of injury or PDO, property damage, it's quite high individually, especially the deaths. And so that's in the lower left, that's how much they cost. And when you look at the 1,234 reported DVCs in 2023, and that's the actual value, 1,234, you come up with about $25 million in costs. That's dwarfed by the unreported DVCs, which the insurance companies keep track of. They're up at about 250 million in cost. So it's not inconsequential. In the deer, which always die in a car accident, or almost always, at restitution value of $500, that still comes out to about $17 million. So that's quite a lot. Next slide, please. And one of the things we want to do is try to reduce DVCs. One of the likely things for that is just people paying attention. Every year, there's a newspaper article right about the time in fall, which coincides with daylight savings time, warning people about peak deer car crash season is ahead, because it is. Fall is a peak. There's a second minor peak in the summer, but fall is it, and it's partially related to the daylight savings time change in people's driving. Next slide, please. And some of the other data we found, which is kind of curious, is so this is those 35,000 DVCs. And when we look at Minnesota, you can see the concentration areas of DVCs. And the 7-county metro area has 50% of the DVCs in that database, about half of the Minnesota population, and about half of the vehicle miles. So what you're going to see in the wildlife casualty count is a lot of DVCs and AVCs down there. So next slide. And the other species, so I focused on DVCs a lot because that's what I worked with. Larger species like bear and moose, they're going to typically be reported. Turtles and frogs, not so much, but it's coming up on the nesting season for turtles. So they're obviously going to be of importance, and that's one of the reasons the zoo and MnDOT are working on that. Probably the most common, based on my observations, are going to be raccoons and skunks and maybe squirrels in urban areas. And that's another benefit of the wildlife casualty count, is we're actually getting some numbers. So that's what I had to say.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you, Ron, very much for that. I'm going to pass it over to Caleb and Taylor now. Here we go.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Ron. And That was a great comprehensive coverage of kind of what you're looking at in Minnesota. And so I'm just going to cover our statewide wildlife vehicle collision study, talk a little bit about the background of the study design, and our webpage, and then I'll turn it over to Taylor to talk about the roadkill observation and data system survey that we launched in conjunction with our statewide study, and then some of the data that we're collecting with it, future uses, and then she'll wrap up with some of our outreach and materials. But so next slide, I'll get into the weeds of our study. So just a little bit of background on our statewide wildlife vehicle collision study. This wildlife crossing work that's happening in Missouri is one of the first statewide studies in Missouri, and a lot of states are doing this kind of work. Missouri was one of 17 states to receive funding from the Wildlife Crossing Pilot Program. It was a Federal Highways Administration grant to do some work to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions. And like I said, we were one of 17 states to receive a grant for this, and it was a $320,000 grant. And then we met our 20% non-federal match with our partnership with the Missouri Department of Conservation and Land Learning Foundation. The project concluded in February of 2026, and it was a study led by HDR Engineering and Wildlife Connectivity Institute. And essentially, the goal, like I said, of this study was to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and improve habitat connectivity. But one of the things we wanted to do was to look at where these crashes with wildlife are happening. And so out of this study, we received a comprehensive report that identified 627 priority segments. And the data sources for this study included crash records, like Ron mentioned, with those police reports, carcass reports, previous studies, wildlife habitat data, and then transportation and ecology best practices. So looking at how to mitigate those wildlife vehicle collisions. And really the biggest outcome of our statewide study was a ranking of all of these priority segments to be mitigated, and then detailing like a cost-effective mitigation recommendations for our top 10 sites. So looking at those highest priority road segments. And then just really this study provided a strategic blueprint for how to mitigate wildlife vehicle collisions in Missouri. Next slide. So the study was divided into two parts. The first part analyzed the conditions and ranked the statewide wildlife vehicle collision hotspots using roadway, habitat, and species data. And then the second part of the study really looked at the alternatives analysis and then recommended mitigations, and then provided an opportunity for public to comment on these wildlife vehicle collision hotspots. And then another big component of this, like I mentioned with our top 10 sites, was the benefit cost analysis. So this looked at the cost of those reported wildlife vehicle collisions, including the value, like Ron mentioned, with those restitution values. We had a similar analysis done based on the value of white-tailed deer, and worked with our conservation partners to develop that cost for those collisions with those wildlife. And then so with that benefit cost analysis, you look at what would be reduced by the mitigation within those priority segments, and then the cost of the mitigation over the assumed service life of that mitigation to get the benefit to cost ratio of mitigating those wildlife vehicle collisions. Next slide. So I won't get into all the details, but like I mentioned, we had 627 priority segments. And you can look at our results of our study on our statewide wildlife vehicle collision webpage. We've got basically a comprehensive webpage that talks about how we went about conducting this study, and some of the outputs of that were our final report, interactive map. And if you could go to the kind of next animation. And here's just kind of a representation of what our interactive map is, showing all of our priority segments and all of the data that went into those. And this map here is kind of a supplement to that study, and it shows transportation safety, roadway data, such as the locations of wildlife vehicle collisions, and then ecological factors like suitable and occupied habitat for our priority species that we looked at for our study. We had 25 priority species, and suitable and occupied habitat layers developed for each of those to kind of really help prioritize locations that were both significant safety issues and high diversity and occupied habitat, to kind of get an idea of where we can kind of prioritize those priority segments. And then with the map, you can also see the top 10 segments, and then the scoring criteria that went into to ranking those. And then also this map is going to be used to help with planning, design, construction, maintenance, and operation of Missouri's transportation system, and to help reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and improve habitat connectivity in Missouri. And a lot of this work is really awesome, and a lot of states are doing this, and this is kind of what Caitlin is looking at for Minnesota. And so I'm just kind of excited to share just what one state is doing, and kind of help some others out, and just kind of get the word out there on the work that's being done. So we'll pass it over to Taylor to kind of cover the roads and wrap up the presentation for the MoDOT side.
All right. Thank you, Caleb. So now moving on, going to talk about the roadkill observation and data system, or the road survey that Caitlin mentioned earlier. So this app was something that we added in addition to our statewide wildlife vehicle collision study. So we have information about the app and how to download it and everything on our webpage as well. And so, like Caitlin said, it's modeled off the Center for Large Landscape Conservation survey. And if you'll go ahead and go to the next animation. So the survey is available to the public to contribute to data collection for species that are not captured in the Highway Patrol crash reports. So like Ron was saying, there's a lot of species that get hit, and if they don't generate any injuries or damage, usually they're not reported. So we're hoping with this survey that we can gather more data to fill some of those data gaps. So if you click the next slide, please. So yeah, so all of this helps to better inform our decisions and where and how we implement mitigation measures in Missouri. And so far we're up to over 1,500 records since launching the survey in October 2025, which is pretty awesome. So this map here is an example of one of the segments that was included in the study report. So here you're just looking at just MoDOT carcass data records. So there were only 3 deer that were recorded within this segment. So if you'll go to the next animation, please. So now this shows we're integrating the Missouri State Highway Patrol crash reports. So that adds an additional 32 records if you look at it from 2014 to 2023, and then 16 records from 2019 to 2023. So next animation, please. So finally, when we look at this segment with the roads data also added, there's an additional 24 records of other wildlife from 12 different species, and that's all recorded from October 2025 when it launched to May 2026. So just a span of 8 months. So again, this just shows that by acquiring more data, especially through the road survey, we can fill those data gaps and get a better idea of the actual mortality that is occurring. Next slide, please. So with any program, practice, or project that involves public safety, people and wildlife, public engagement and interaction is obviously a big component of the project being successful. So we have worked with our communications team to develop some outreach materials for public involvement. So this is one of the postcards that our communications team has developed. So if you'll click the little animation, please. You just flip the postcard over, and that's what's on the other side. So it's just one example of how MoDOT is working on promoting the app so that more people can participate. And we've also had multiple news articles. Caleb has done quite a few interviews, and there have been quite a few social media posts as well that have been released since the completion of the study. So, all right, on to you, Caitlin.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is guide anyone who is on with us here on how to download this app and use roads. Now, I'm going to point out something that I didn't put at the beginning, which is our count is a week long, and it starts on May 22nd, which is the Friday right before Memorial Day. So I would highly recommend downloading this now and kind of playing around with it, but that's when our official count starts, just so you're aware. So first step is to go to your app store and download Survey 123 by Esri. That's where Roads is based. And this is the icon. So it's very, very simple to find. So you'll just click on that and download it. And I'm going to go to the next slide. When you have that downloaded, this is the home screen. So ArcGIS from Survey 123. Now, this step is important to being able to download our study and our project. And if you're in Missouri, downloading the Missouri project, you'll click Continue without signing in. You don't need to create a username on this app to use it. All right. Next, what you will do is this is the home screen that will pop up. Now, when you open yours up, it's not going to show these projects here because you won't have added them yet. You'll have to go to this little QR code in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and you'll click on that to scan a project. Now, this is the QR code for our project. So if you've been able to keep up, I'm sorry, I have to move a little quickly so we don't run out of time, but if you've been able to, please scan it. If you're not able to scan it now, I will email these out. I'll also have it available on our website. And our icon says MN Roads, Minnesota Roads. This one is the Missouri one. I was testing out theirs as well. So if you have both of them on your phone, make sure when you're in Minnesota, click on the Minnesota Roads. All right. And this is where you're going to proceed to enter your data. Now you'll click on Minnesota Roads, and at the bottom, you can see that it says collect. You'll click the collect button. The Roads app, we're encouraging you, gives a warning there at the top. Please don't use this while driving. We want everyone to be very safe. If you're not able to enter, say you're driving alone and you see a dead deer on the side of the road, we want you to enter that, but not right there. Wait until you've stopped driving and safely parked. You can change the location. So if you have a rough location of where you saw that, please enter that and then move forward with enter. Don't enter while you're driving. The app will also automatically input the date and the time. Again, only take a photo if it's safe to do so. We don't require a photo. Put the type of animals observed. You do need to enter that information in, and your confidence. So if you're really sure that was a deer, or really sure it was a raccoon or turtle, whatever, high or low on that. And of course, how many animals you observed and the condition you saw them in. And the final request I will give you is that you would enter your initials in the comments. That just ensures that we're not double recording your results 2 times. And it's helpful to know, obviously we won't see your name there, but we'll see your initials. Maybe you'll enter a couple of times in, and that's just neat for us to know that you're using it. All right. And finally, this is a screenshot from the Center for Large Landscape Conservation's project in Yellowstone, using the same app that we're using and that the Missouri team is using. This is right near Yellowstone. And this is the type of dashboard that we're looking to create from this project. Now, our project is only a week long, so we might not have quite as many instances, but this is the type of thing that you could create with this type of citizen science. So we're looking forward to seeing all the results.